I have some wonderful news to share regarding deepwater offshore wind energy here in Maine.
This is going to happen, this offshore wind idea, and the question is it going to be Maine, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania? I think it can and should be Maine, and there are a lot of people working on it.
The Department of Energy will make a significant financial commitment to the University of Maine team working to develop a deepwater floating wind energy project off the coast of Maine. And I'm pleased to have worked successfully to secure funding to support the university's research and development.
Now, there is an international race to design and deploy these floating wind turbines.
You've heard of wind farms? This thing I'm proposing is a wind ranch. This is big.
The US market is such an exciting opportunity to deploy this technology at a truly industrial scale.
The people promoting offshore wind are not just telling us that it's going to save the world. They're also telling us that it's inevitable.
Offshore wind is coming.
Offshore wind power is coming to the Gulf of Maine.
Seems to me we should be asking not where and when to put these things in the ocean, but whether to put these things in the ocean. But I know that there's a huge amount of money out there, and there's going to be a lot of it government money, a lot of it foreign investment. And the worry, really, and I share the worry with the fishing industry, is that this is a fait accompli. It's done. That they're going to put these things in the ocean no matter what we learn.
The governor has said wind power is coming to the Gulf of Maine regardless of what the state does.
In this episode, we're taking a look back at how the race to industrialize the Gulf of Maine has ratcheted up over the last decade, and especially over the past 2 years. And then we're going to take some time to delve into the details of a subject that we only scratched the surface of in episode 1, which is the danger posed to marine life of all varieties by the impending ocean industrialization. Our special guest in this episode is a Mainer from the field of scientific research. Paul Anderson was kind enough to meet me for an interview in June 2021. And what follow are some highlights of our conversation.
My name's Paul Anderson. I'm the Executive Director at the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries. We're a small nonprofit organization based in Stonington, Maine. Our mission is to help sustain commercial fishing in eastern Maine and beyond, and really work to sustain the communities that depend on fishing. I've been at this center for 3 years now. Prior to that, I worked at the University of Maine for 16 years, where I ran the Sea Grant program. I was trained long ago in microbiology, but I really haven't touched a test tube in years. A lot of what I've become is a manager of science and helping to link science to real activities, things that are needing scientific research. The thing that's exciting about our center is we try to blend traditional science approaches with local knowledge. And we truly believe that fishermen have a lot of knowledge and creativity, resilience just in how they go about their daily work. And so by bringing that into the conversation, I think it helps science to be more valuable. We're a small organization, 10 staff people, many of them in the programs in the field, but we don't do anything without collaborating. And so we like to think that we're connected with fishermen and other organizations and municipal leaders and others that are interested in that same common set of goals for sustaining life the way we like it here in Maine. And so all of our work, when I say that we're into sustaining commercial fisheries, we're interested in those communities. Can they have schools? They got enough kids to have schools? Can they support their fire departments? What's the economic engines that help that community to be sustainable? Because it's not just about counting fish as we explore our work in fisheries. I had worked in state government for a while right out of college, so I was in the regulatory seat, and I understood the challenge of being in government and having legislation and regulation drive what you do on a daily basis limits creativity. So then I go to the university where, presumably creativity is the sweet spot, and start looking at all these awesome technology systems and oceanographic buoys, all this stuff, and realizing that, wow, even that has its limitations. But we've got more than 5,000 lobster boats on the coast of Maine, each one of them making observations every day. And these fishermen are seeing stuff in the water or observing changes of the season. The shed is early. The alewives run differently. And climate change on the planet is causing ecosystem shifts, some of which we can see, some of which you have to look back over 10 or 20 years to really notice. Sea level rise is going to affect our working waterfronts. It's just going to. We're going to have to get smart about infrastructure and how we're going to keep up our docks and piers and be able to support, both commercial fishing but other water users. The ecosystem itself we know is changing, and species of fish that are coming into the Gulf of Maine that weren't here before are a pretty clear indicator that it's going to change. I think fishermen are a good example of resilience. Over the decades, they've had to respond to what's changing around them and either fish differently or fish smarter or use a different gear or even switch to a different fishery because things were changing. So that nimbleness that they have, we could all take a lesson from and figure out how to integrate this stuff in an intelligent way instead of stumbling on the next solution.
If we harness just 3% of the offshore wind resource in the Gulf of Maine, we can heat every home in Maine and drive every car.
Which in turn would slow climate change and
keep in Maine $4 to $6 billion a year.
Of course, they can do the analysis and say there's a lot of wind out there. And at one point our former Governor King called the Gulf of Maine the Saudi Arabia of wind.
There's enough energy out in the Gulf of Maine to supply all the energy needs for the state of Maine forever.
Well, the backdrop to the whole thing is a goal, not just by Maine, but the United States and even other countries to transition to renewable energy, right? So we've set up some pretty lofty goals over the next couple, 2-3 decades to wean ourselves as much as possible away from fossil fuels, at least for power generation, and get into other kinds of renewables. So that's, if everybody buys into that, then you have to find places to deploy things like solar and wind on land or wherever. I watch the technology of all this come along, and it's pretty amazing what we can do. Solar panels today are not what they were 10 years ago. The wind energy machines continue to change and develop. And so that quest to come up with renewables leads to all these different creative approaches. I was at the University of Maine as the Maine Aqua Ventus technology came together. That's this floating wind technology that the University of Maine has pioneered. And they patented that, and I helped try to do some outreach for some of the communities to talk about what this thing means. And we ought to test one of these things in the water and see if it can work. And therein is the Monhegan project, to put one of these in deep water and see how it works in terms of its mooring systems, its cabling, its turbines.
Partnering with industry leaders RWE and Mitsubishi's Diamond Offshore Wind, who committed $100 million, we set out to deploy an 11 megawatt class floating offshore wind demonstration turbine called New England Aqua Ventus I.
Can we measure any impact on the ecosystem from this machine? Can we figure out how close can you fish to it? Can we play around with that machine and learn from it? That was the plan 10 years ago, and it was fraught with challenge. A lot of fishermen were curious, didn't like the idea that this cable might be in the way, but I remember the conversation being kind of a gee whiz, let's play around with this and try it. My understanding at that time was this machine, if it works, and we patent it, and you can build them locally without huge technology that steel structures require, that it could be deployed around the world in places where there's deep water and they need electricity, maybe developing nations, and help these nations have electricity. Everybody wants some electricity.
We plan to partner with the fishing industry to better understand the impacts of floating wind and to develop solutions. We are supporting the state of Maine in developing a floating research array consisting of multiple Volturnus turbines.
But what's happened in the last year or so was a fairly aggressive effort by the state to apply for an offshore wind research array, which would be a sizable piece of water, 16 square miles somewhere off of Portland, where they could put in several of these and create a research array of them, so maybe a dozen of these things in that footprint. And that's raised a bunch of concern among fishermen and community people who live on the coast, not only for taking away that spot, but I think there's a concern that it's a foot in the door to creating even bigger commercialized arrays, industrializing the Gulf of Maine with maybe a field of 100 of these things, which is going to be huge.
The eyes of the world are watching. This is, of course, a starting point. Obviously, our goals, the administration's goals, the nation's goals are aggressive.
We now have quite a bit of federal support coming from both the Department of the Interior, the Department of Energy, and the Labor Department. And we're seeing that kind of collaboration result in a target now that we have for 30 gigawatts of offshore wind energy to be deployed by 2030, which will trigger a $12 billion per year capital investment. That's just the beginning. I believe that floating wind will be a big part of that and will be increasingly more important as time goes on.
My organization doesn't have a hard stance on this issue, but the way that I and my staff and board are thinking about this, I think, is that we want to be really careful. We don't want to make a misstep here. Industrializing the Gulf of Maine or any part of the ocean should be a last resort. We should make sure that we've explored plenty of the other opportunities that are coming down the pike in terms of other technologies. There are going to be improvements in transmission efficiency in my lifetime. There are going to be improvements in superconductivity and the way that electricity is used and moved. If that's true, can we de-emphasize just the generation of electricity? I worry that nobody's talking about conserving energy. We're just worried about trying to create a whole bunch of energy. So that's got a financial motivator in the energy development sector that I don't understand enough to criticize, but it just seems to me we've forgotten to be really careful that if we're going to do things in our environment to generate electricity, let's consider that electricity precious. And I know the scientists and engineers, they want to do good stuff for the planet. There's a lot of good people on the government side of this and at the university who, they want to do the right thing. They really do. But some of the motives, I worry when you get developers in the mix and people are thinking about, the money to be made off of offshore wind energy or selling these machines. There's a huge amount of money out there. And there's going to be a lot of it government money, a lot of it foreign investment. And I worry that some of those factors overshadow the need for that engagement and that local voice. At Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries, one of our big reasons that I went there was because we have this opportunity to really look at what we call ecosystem-based management. And that's kind of looking at both the natural system and its changes, and the upland, the upland and how that affects the ocean. I mean, this river here, meteorologic shifts and the changing patterns of water movement. We try to inform the science in a way that we're going to answer the right questions and presumably be able to respond with good, solid policy that helps us to be resilient, right? And getting to those right questions, I think, is where fishermen and local voices is really important. To make sure, are we really asking the right questions so that we don't fritter away this technology or those dollars for government research on something that's just kind of sexy for that researcher, but it may not matter in the world. There's all kinds of change going on around us that's going to require creativity. If we let just policy or let just engineering drive those decisions, we may not choose wisely. One of the other things that's been in play, and this has been a kind of a personal and professional frustration for me, is that the state successfully got some funding from the Economic Development Administration to do what's called an offshore energy roadmap. And this would be presumably a 3-year, couple $1 million to run a 3-year planning exercise to explore the value chain, the workforce needs, the technology, the ecological footprints, what would it mean if we did have an array of these machines off the coast of Maine, and do some scenario planning and engage fishermen in that process and really do it well. And with 3 years, I think you could do that well and establish some trust and answer some of the questions that are answerable. And maybe a research array is one of the conclusions of that planning process. But that roadmap got put on the sideline last fall. I was looking forward to getting involved with it and helping to bring fishermen into that conversation with the state. And it's still sitting on ice, the roadmap idea, while they go ahead with applying for a research array. So there's this confluence of things going on, and fishermen are trying to plug into this and pay attention and want to be listened to. I think some of them feel like they're not being listened to.
We had heard, last summer leading into last fall, there were rumors about, Maine's going to be moving forward with offshore wind development. We continue to contact the governor's office to say, hey, we're hearing rumors and we'd really like to hear from the governor's office, from the energy office itself, what are Maine's plans? How can the fishing industry be involved? And we were continually told that there was no information to share. We found out last October that the state had received over $2 million to do a planning effort, an offshore wind roadmap for the state of Maine, and we thought, all right, great, that's a place to start. They're going to invest $2 million, we'll bring stakeholders to the table, we can put our questions on the table and demand some accountability from the government. Instead, what we found out is in early November, they just announced that they were going to develop a small commercial research wind farm off of southern Maine, and we were told, we want your input, but here's where it's going to be located, here are the type of turbines we're going to use, here's where we need to cable into, what's your input? We're thinking, well, you've already decided everything. And what about the $2 million planning effort? How can you propose a research development before you've done the plan to let the stakeholders know what are we looking at? How is this going to solve Maine's renewable energy problem and build that portfolio? How does it fit in with other renewable energy options? None of those questions have been answered.
I said this to the group when we were exploring this research array. Seems to me we should be asking not where and when to put these things in the ocean, but whether to put these things in the ocean. And the Gulf of Maine is a vulnerable ecosystem. It's a sea within the sea, if you understand the oceanography of it. And I think we want to be very careful making that choice.
So as you can see, Paul is absolutely not dead set against offshore wind or wind energy in general. And I've found that offshore wind proponents like to characterize anyone skeptical of their operations as anti-wind hysterics who are just ignoring climate change. And it would be laughable if they were to accuse Paul of that. He's just been asking good and important questions. And he's honest about the fact that most of these questions have not received satisfactory answers yet, even as the developers have been moving full speed ahead. My dad, who has been very vocal about his own opposition to offshore wind farms, elaborates here on some of his own concerns about industrializing the marine environment.
Where they want to install these would be on seamounts, so they want to go off 20 or 30 miles offshore, so they figure that's where most people can't see them, so out of sight, out of mind.
And as we always say, the seabed is the limit here. There is no limitation in terms of water depth for deployments.
They want to mount these on seamounts. Well, seamounts are outcroppings, little mountain ranges that are in the ocean. Well, the higher the seamount, the less materials they'll need to install them. So it makes sense economically for them to hit these seamounts. Well, the seamounts are where all of ocean life thrives. So you've got small fish, big fish. You've got the little fish are hiding there. The top predators, like great white sharks, are there and they're hunting the small fish. And it's a cat and mouse game, and they are counting on that shelter to hide from the predator. And the predator is also hiding as well, trying to catch the prey. And that's where the small fish will continue to grow, continue to grow. And now where are the fish going to grow to if they don't have the seamounts to live? All marine life, where's it going to go? If you go offshore further, there's less area that they can actually live. They need to go shallower. So you're expecting all of that sea life all of a sudden to move close to shore? Well, if you move close to shore, now you're close to where boat traffic is. Now you have more human interaction with all of these different marine animals, whether it's the whales. The whale migration is going to be thrown off by that. We'll see the effect in the ecosystem with the windmills. All of the migratory seabirds that go up and down the East Coast. They've recorded over 200 types of migratory birds over the years that frequent off those islands. The closer all these migratory birds get to land, they're going to get closer to eagles and things like that. So the birds of prey, they want to stay away from them. So they're off there where they're pretty safe. Well, they're not going to be very safe anymore, because now they've got hundreds of whirring blades right in the way, just getting ready to chowder them up. Now, where's the Audubon Society with that? Where is their outrage that now you've all of a sudden set up a salad shooter in the Gulf of Maine that's going to grind up all of these birds as they're going either south or north? You've got the gannets and the petrels, all these different seabirds that stay there. We're not just talking about seagulls like you'd see up to McDonald's. One island off here is called Seal Island. There's a population of puffins out there. Now Seal Island is about 20 miles off the coast. And now, boom, we set in these 750-foot sweeping structures. Endangered puffins will die. To pad the wallets of big corporations, get them all billions of taxpayer dollars, and we can all pay 2 or 3 times what we normally would pay for our electric bill.
We are looking at floating platforms that are 300 feet by 300 feet. They're massive concrete structures upon which a wind turbine that is going to be 700 to 800 feet is going to be situated on top. Now, Lobsterman is in a 40-foot vessel coming around these. You've got blades, 3 blades. Each blade is the size of a football field, the length of a football field, spinning. And they are anchored down with anchors that are 30 to 40 feet per anchor, chain links that are 9 feet each. The metal is 6 inches in diameter. So when you think about the actual physical structure that they're putting in the ocean and you wonder, what are the environmental impacts? If you're a fisherman, you are extremely worried. It is truly an industrialization. They are massive. The turbine spinning breaks up the whole surface layer and into the water column, so it disperses all of the phytoplankton and zooplankton, which is the forage for our endangered whales. We know that the chains are dragging on the bottom, disrupting the benthic habitat. They require long cables that are to be buried, can mess with lobsters. I mean, there are just countless potential environmental impacts that we really don't understand how massive they are. And it's not just one turbine, they are wind farms.
Wind farms? This thing I'm proposing is a wind ranch.
Thank you, Senator. We stand corrected. They are wind ranches.
So we're looking at 12, but Massachusetts is in the process of building one with 84 wind turbines. So the potential for the growth and how these are going to move together will both have an impact in a small area, but as they start to grow, you know, really potentially destructive consequences for the Gulf's ecosystem.
These chain links are very heavy, so that's the size of a bed of a pickup truck. And then they'll have 7 to 9 times the depth of the water for these chains. So if you're in 300 feet of water on a seamount, you've got an excess of at least 1,000 feet of chain with no strain on it that's dragging back and forth across the bottom. The slack that is created by having that much scope, now that's going to drag back and forth across the bottom. Now you've got this platform, and then you've got the bottom of the ocean, and that platform is going around in tide and wind. So these 3 chains that they'll come down from 3 different corners with 7 to 9 times the length, so that's all going to be dragging around here. So you've got a seamount, 3 anchors, all of this chain, and as that moves around, that's going to grind down the ecosystem, the home of small fish, big fish, lobsters, crabs, everything. Nothing lives on a flat plain. It's kind of like in the desert you'll find life, but it won't be much. You know, we're not going after sidewinder snakes. So you go to a mountain, peaks and valleys, that's where you find life in the forest. And of course, with marine growth, say it would be kelp and things like that, that would be on the seamount. So those would be like trees in the forest. So now as this chain goes around, those trees in that forest are gone instantly because it doesn't take anything to chafe those off. That chain will just scour the bottom first thing. So now I have these giant bald spots that used to house all sorts of marine life. So everything that lives there now, they're gonna have to find a new home. Well, I don't know where they're gonna go live because the Gulf of Maine's been their home for eons. Those fish have got to go somewhere. If they lose their home there, where are they gonna go? You expect them all coming in closer to shore? That's not naturally where they would be. So now you're altering the ecosystem and the marine life to adapt to us going in forcefully and doing something completely unnatural. All of your commercial fisheries are designed now to be as little impact and to take a specific portion of that species so that the species is sustainable. When you go into a giant industrial complex that they're trying to build with these offshore windmills, now you're just going in and you are doing heavy construction over where everything is living, and you are displacing them. They go further offshore, there's no seamounts out there, there's nothing for them to live in, so they will die. Drive them inshore, water temperatures are changing between winter and summer. Some species of fish want water temperatures that are more consistent with those seamounts not getting close to shore, where all of a sudden that water temperature drops, because as we have winter come on here on the coast of Maine and all of New England, the mountains get snow, that runoff comes out in the spring, the water temperature is exceedingly cold. That's not what they want. We're just disrupting the building blocks of sea life all the way up to the top predators. These are all heavy industrial materials that when they're installed are destructive, and they will destroy the seamounts, they'll destroy the homes for the fish, and for the lobsters, and for the crabs, and all sea life. The only thing I don't think would be disrupted by it would be the slime eels, and they are the very bottom of the food chain, and they just go along and eat dead things. So I don't think we want to trade a robust and productive Gulf of Maine for an overabundance of slime eels. The ecosystem that we have spent decades trying to protect. We know it's fragile. All of the work that has been done up until now to protect the environment, now it's like to fight climate change, we're going to destroy the ecosystem. It does not make sense. It all has to go in. If you're trying to do something for the betterment of the earth and for mankind, it all should be working in symmetry. It shouldn't be destroy this to save that. It doesn't work like that. You destroy it, there's going to be an effect from it, and a negative effect. It's not going to be a good effect. So in the whole scheme of things, who benefits from this? They're saying that the world is going to benefit in 100 years. I say they're benefiting now, and they will benefit until the money runs out, because when the money runs out, are they going to go out there and install those windmills for free? Not going to happen. Even if the material is provided, would they donate their time? I don't think it's that important to them. I think what it is you've got a multinational corporation who has saddled up alongside of a government leader, and they've convinced the other politicians that, hey, you know what? This is a good way to make some money. Why don't you invest in this? We've got the people convinced that, hey, this is for the good. Forget the destruction on the ecosystem. Forget the destruction of the coastal communities. They're looking to make a profit. I'm not opposed to someone making a profit, but this is not a good profit. You are being deceitful in how you get the funding, and you're being deceitful on what the end result will be 100 years from now.
From the fishing industry's perspective, there has been a lot of talk about collaborating with the fishing industry, but when the fishing industry steps up, attends these meetings, expresses our concerns, we are unilaterally dismissed and told that this development is going to move forward, and we need to sort of fall into line and figure out a way to do that in a way that minimizes the impacts on our fishery. Fundamentally, people have refused to have the discussion of what is the cost of offshore wind, at what price is that energy coming into the grid for the people of Maine, how big of a development are we looking at for the Gulf of Maine, what are we trying to coexist with? Right now we're grappling with one wind turbine in state waters as a demonstration, another 12 or so in southern Maine waters, but nobody's told us what's next. So how do we try to site these things so that they're not interfering with commercial fisheries when we have no idea of what the potential build-out's going to be? Nobody has committed to really acknowledging that we don't know what the environmental damage of these is going to be. We don't know how it's going to affect the lobster resource. You know, there are bits and pieces of science from all around the world, but we feel like our ecosystem and our fishery is greatly at risk, and nobody is stopping to say, let's answer these important questions and move forward based on information. They're saying, let's move forward and we'll get the information later.
That has a lot of our smart fishermen who are paying attention to this really worried that, you know, this is all happening regardless of what we do, and we're just putting lipstick on a pig trying to dress up this conversation and pretend it's a planning exercise. And the worry, really, and I share the worry with the fishing industry, is that this is a fait accompli. It's done. That the developers, Norwegians, Europeans, wherever they come from, they know that fact about the Saudi Arabia of wind in the Gulf of Maine. And in federal waters, deep water, there's probably designs working behind the scenes with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to stake out some territory out there and do this and cable it to Boston or wherever. Many fishermen, even this whole last year of having to be on screens and using Zoom and stuff like that to interact, Some fishermen, God bless them, have stepped up and they're holding their nose and they're engaging as best they can. But we know that's not the best way to talk to a fisherman. You know, I've had some great experiences sitting in wheelhouses looking at charts with fishermen and scribbling notes on it and having a cup of coffee. That's quality engagement, and you can realize that we're all in this together. I guess the thing I hold out hope for is that we in Maine waters, we have strong fisheries. And we could still have a vibrant Maine-based lobster fishery and clam fishery and scallops. You know, we share a principle at the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries of honoring local values and local traditions. The sensibility of, you know, fishermen and communities in eastern Maine is profoundly exciting to us, and what that means for our culture. And if we hold those principles dear and we create jobs and infrastructure along our coast for this beautiful product, we'll always be in the seafood game in Maine. We can't always control what's in the offshore areas, and we have to swing at that. We've got to advocate where we can, but you know, one of the problems with my colleagues, who I respect a lot, is just saying no right now is not going to work. We got to say, yeah, but. We got to be at the table and ask articulate, good questions. I was so impressed at the lobster rally because, I don't know, a dozen lobstermen and other community members, legislators, got up and spoke, and they were really respectful. They had done their homework. They had good questions. They were not there just screaming. It wasn't torches and pitchforks. It was yeah, but why are you doing that? Or why isn't this answer available? And that needs to continue. And it may be that we can fend off something in the Gulf of Maine that we don't want.
That should be plenty of food for thought to anyone who assumes that all scientists are completely fine with just handing over the Gulf of Maine to green energy corporations. My personal takeaways from what Paul had to say are that industrializing the ocean is not a foregone conclusion, and let's weigh all of the options. So there is one update to this whole conversation, which is that 3 months after I shot the interview with Paul that you saw here, the State of Maine did finally resume the offshore wind roadmap procedure. They held the first meeting of the Fisheries Working Group in September of 2021, and that group has been hard at work to develop some recommendations that will be submitted to the state very soon if they haven't been submitted already by the time this video is done. I've been told that the roadmap facilitators and the state agency folks who are involved in this process have been working earnestly for the best outcome. The concerns I've heard so far pertain to the federal agency BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. It sounds like they are still just pressing forward with their own agenda. And so while local voices are at least finally getting that forum to provide their comments, what's disappointing is that BOEM seems to be ignoring those local voices so far. This episode was brought to you entirely by independent contributions from people who care about these issues. And if you want to help me bring this series over the finish line, we're about 5% towards paying for the whole project as of this moment, which is a big help. We still got a long way to go, but I think we're going to make it eventually. And you can pitch in as little as $5 on Indiegogo, or as little as $3 on Patreon. If a bunch of you do just that, we will fund this whole series in no time. And I also want to mention that Paul Anderson's organization, the Maine Center for Coastal Fisheries, is a nonprofit that is definitely worthy of your support. I, for one, really appreciate that they are run with integrity and that they're not afraid to ask tough questions that you heard discussed here today. You can learn more about their work at coastalfisheries.org. And you won't have to look far to find a donate page on their site. So if you're looking to get an early start on your 2022 charitable giving, they're a worthwhile recipient of your tax-deductible gift. So we'll be hearing the last couple of clips of his interview next week, and we'll also be hearing from a colleague of his with an interview that you won't want to miss. In the meantime, share this video with people who care about marine life. There's a chance we could prevent this underwater damage if enough people learn about it and tell their elected officials to protect the Gulf of Maine from these dangers.